Good morning, Gamecocks. JC Shurburtt here with coffee. Today is Wednesday, May 14th, the year of our Lord 2025, and certainly thank you for listening today. Gamecock baseball team won yesterday. I think that makes them, for the season, undefeated against mid-major midweek opponents. So there's one feather in the cap, so to speak. And so there you go. I think that's the first time it's happened in about 10 years. That's not easy to do, but at the same time, I don't think anybody should be um, jumping up and down celebrating. I did think the guys played hard last night, hung in there. Excruciating loss for Winthrop, being up 5-1, and the Gamecocks rallied in the eighth, bottom of the eighth, and won the game 6-5. So a nice win. LSU, that series starts tomorrow, and that's the final one. Then they go to Hoover, which has not been kind to the Gamecocks through the years, but anything can happen in the new format. So we'll see what transpires there. But certainly, any way you slice it, it's been a disappointing season. But hats off for getting the win last night. It means you're kind of still have a pulse, at least for an inning. While the season marches to a close and everybody wants to know what will happen afterward. There's going to be massive changes regardless of the coaching situation or not. I think there's going to be a lot of attrition. So we'll see what happens moving forward. Gamecock softball obviously starts on Friday. NCAA tournament regional in Columbia at Beckham Field. Gamecocks will play Virginia at 5:30. I mean, sorry. Phew. Let me back up. Gamecocks will play Elon at 5:30. Virginia plays North Florida at 3, and then if Virginia and South Carolina win, they will meet on Saturday. So there's kind of the catch up of the calendar. Did want to apologize for those of you that listen to Coffee and not necessarily the show. A couple of episodes ago, I went through the scheduled official visitors for that first weekend, May 30th. And that was my dumb butt mistake. I should have checked. I just kind of went off the database and then was asking around about the players. And there's a lot of changes to that schedule. And Hale McGranahan, who was all over it, had a nice report on thebigspur.com with the new visitors list. I'm going to kind of re-update that as we get closer. I'm going to let it kind of simmer for a little while. But the disappointing part of it was Ben Boulware, defensive tackle, Brian Harris, a defensive tackle, the Seven Cloud, who was committed to Georgia. All those guys I went over the other day apparently aren't visiting. Brian Harris is making a decision a week before the visit was scheduled. And obviously, if he's not going to make his visit, he's probably not coming to South Carolina. So we'll see. Kind of on the show yesterday, just to recap, Aiden Harris, Noah Clark, two highly ranked defensive tackle prospects from North Carolina. Those are kind of the two to focus on right now. I'm sure there'll be more. That's a position where they need to sign some guys. There's no doubt about it in the 2026 class. So we'll keep you posted on that. But again, I'm sorry for going through. Everybody sits through an episode and listens about all these players, and 4 or 5 of them aren't visiting, and that the next day that's not cool. That's not what it's all about. So sorry about that. That's something that we'll keep track of a little bit better around here. New rankings out from 24/7 Sports. Just wanted to. One player that is visiting that weekend is Carter Meadows. He's almost up to a 5-star prospect. Kind of, I think, 33, 34, that range. There's only 32 5-stars. And so that's according to 24/7 Sports Composite. We'll see how that comes out. But Gamecocks have made some pretty good moves with him. He was in for the spring game. If you start thinking about how can what kind of edge class can you have? Well, pretty good if you get Carter Meadows and Julian Walker from Irmo as kind of bookends. I think that's probably one thing they're selling them on. And so good news there on the recruiting front for football. What I want to talk about today is hype, our expectations The word hype sometimes, I don't know, people overuse it. It's, these days in my line of work, sometimes if you say something positive about a player at all, you're hyping them or a team. So I just, that word kind of gets on me a little bit. And, or if you're not negative, sometimes you get accused of hypes. To me, hype is making grand declarations and, you know, things like that. It's not saying, hey, this guy was fast or hey, this guy has a chance to be good or this guy, has a good ceiling. He may not be there, all that good stuff. So that's why I don't like the word so much. But boy, there's a lot of it these days, out there. Hype, pure hype, like the good stuff, right? Um, and as it relates to the Gamecocks, this offseason, it's been an offseason of higher expectations. We're here in May. We just got the kickoff time yesterday, by the way, for those that missed it. The Gamecocks and Virginia Tech Hokies will kick off the 2025 season on Sunday, August 31st at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, and the Aflac kickoff at 3 p.m. That game will be televised by ESPN nationally. So really looking forward to that game. Have been for a while. Always nice to play in the place that you have championship games. South Carolina through the years, I guess, has not been hyped enough, right? To be invited to those preseason games or the Peach Bowl for that matter. But we only played in the Peach Bowl twice. Peach Bowl's in Atlanta, and it wasn't always a major bowl. And the one time they did take them in the kind of lately, they had to because the Gamecocks won the SEC East. So they played Florida State on New Year's Eve. They actually played twice in the Georgia Dome in 1 month. Auburn for the SEC championship, and then Florida State in the Peach Bowl. Both losses. So I was thinking back the last time South Carolina won a game in Atlanta. I'd have to go back and look because when I came along, they played at Georgia Tech, but they lost. They lost in '88 in a infamous game, one of the most or notorious. I don't know how you describe it, to Grant Field, and then in '90, Georgia Tech, of course, won the national championship. Gamecocks lost that one 27-6. They lost the SEC championship game. They lost the Peach Bowl. I need to go back to the '70s because Jim Carlin, during his era, he was a Georgia Tech grad and he played Georgia Tech couple of times, and they may have won one of those games over there. But I know they didn't win the '69 Peach Bowl either. They lost 14-3 to a Jim Carlin coached West Virginia team, offensive coordinator Bobby Bowden. That was the other league championship. Gamecocks kind of won one and a half league titles, right? And that was the ACC title team in '69. And so I got to go back and find out when the last time is they won a game there. They haven't played very many. But I'm certainly looking forward to that. So that's out there. And so we're getting ready for the season. Talking season, I guess. John Strickland mentioned that yesterday on the morning show. It's almost talking season. Spring sports are wrapping up. So I guess do we transfer from list season to talking season, or I would imagine list season continues. I would imagine, just a guess there. But South Carolina, I was trying to think back. When's the last off season that Carolina had these types of expectations? And you look around, and just about everybody that has a top 25 that they carry with them throughout the off season these days. The borrowed a page from ESPN's way too early, and that's good. I like that actually because you can kind of do an aggregate and get a nice feel for like what everybody else thinks as far as rankings go. So everybody has that and they're releasing it and updating it and all that good stuff. And, South Carolina hadn't really been on those lists in a while. I think that in 17, that was Will Muschamp's second year. They went 9-4, really benefited from the schedule, but also, not a bad football team. They forced a lot of turnovers and, Michigan and Jim Harbaugh in the bowl, big rally. 26-19, 9-4, not a bad season. And there were some folks that had them, I guess, as a dark horse to win the East. Um, some had them at the edge of the top 25. They ended up having in 2018 a really good offense. The defense just got gutted, as we all know. And then the offense sometimes was inconsistent. Tough season, really, in 18, although they were 7-6 and won some exciting games like Tennessee. They rallied to beat them. They beat Ole Miss in a shootout. They, kind of got up off the mat a little bit, but Kentucky was an issue. They lost to A&M. Had a thrilling win over Missouri, 37-35, the Michael Scarnecchia Storm game. But it just wasn't. And then the season ended so poorly with Virginia in the bowl. That was just awful in the Belk Bowl. And so 7-6, and that wasn't what anybody expected. I thought year three of Will Muschamp, Jake Bentley is now a third-year player. You have Debo back healthy. You probably should. Probably a pretty good football team. And it just didn't work out, and that was kind of the start of the decline under the previous regime, I would guess, the Muschamp regime. And sad. That was a very trying season for me too. I thought they would be a lot better. I was wrong. So, and then there was a lot of close games, but in fairness to me, on top of that, Clemson had probably the best team they've ever had. Gamecocks lost to them by 21, 56-35, put up a bunch of yards, but they would have had to have scored every single time to be in that game. And then Clemson, of course, smacked Alabama pretty good in the title game out in San Francisco and won it all. So it's a tough year, just a tough pill to swallow that season. But my point was there were some also now there was a little bit of buzz following 2022 after the Gamecocks finished with a flurry and then lost to Notre Dame in the bowl. But wasn't like this. You have to go back to the 2013 to 14 offseason. And this offseason, this was like I call it the storm clouds are a brewing offseason because Gamecock Nation collectively had never been more confident, more fired up, more positive. It was the first year of the 4-team playoff. Greg McElroy infamously picked the Gamecocks to go and win it all. Dylan Thompson was taking over the starting quarterback, loaded on offense. But there's one thing called the defense that was very disappointing. Gamecocks, I think, were ranked 9th. They opened the season against Texas A&M, which had lost Johnny Manziel, starting Kenny Hill. It was the first game ever on the SEC network. Brent Musburger was in town to call the game, Thursday night game. Carolina's an 11-point favorite, and they got smacked down 52-28. And there we go. Hype ended. Now, that season still could have ended up in Atlanta in the Dome like a lot of them. The defense blew 3 leads of double-digit fourth quarter leads against Kentucky, Missouri, or Missouri, Kentucky, and then Tennessee. If they'd have won those 3, they're a 9-3 football team with a crappy defense, but they win the division because the division was down, obviously, that year. That was Missouri's second straight division title, and, they got walloped by Alabama. But, hey, I would have taken a walloping, right? You always want to win as much as you can. So, anywho, that was a huge offseason. Steve Spurrier had a movie that came out on the SEC network with Kenny Chesney. Paul Feinbaum, he said this season's about defining Spurrier's legacy, all this other stuff. That team finished 7-6 and went to the Independence Bowl. They did have wins over Florida, Georgia, and Miami. They did get Will Muschamp fired at Florida with a overtime win down there in the Swamp, which I don't think Carolina's won in the Swamp since that year. They beat Georgia at home. That hadn't at Williams-Brice. It's the last time that happened. Um, so the Clemson game, Clemson snapped the streak that year. Clemson had the number one defense in the country, and that set the table for their big run. So it was kind of one of those years that when you look back on it, because that's the last time something happened, you're kind of like, well, gosh, I hope we don't have a repeat. And some will sit there and bring up 2014 as it relates to the personnel losses off this team on defense. But you really have to go in and look at like, okay, who were they replacing good players with in 2014? And then look at who these guys are replacing good players with. I'm not saying the defense is going to be best in the SEC. I mean, I'm not making any promises, but I'd be stunned and if this defense, barring catastrophic injury, of course, you always got to put that caveat in, right? Because that's how that happens sometimes. Barring being gutted by injury, if this defense is as bad as the 2014 defense, or even close to as bad, a head should roll because there's no reason. I mean, you were talking that year about 260-pound defensive tackles, slow 6 foot ends. You were talking about no speed at linebacker, and oh, by the way, the secondary was awful. I don't know in 14 how they held Florida to 20 points to win that game. I just, it was credit those kids for being gutsy, because they gutted it out in some of those wins. It's just you can't play defense that way. So and you can't go march into SEC battles with the guys they did. I mean that I don't know who. Maybe people bought into recruit. Maybe they bought into what Spurrier said, which was that Lorenzo Ward said the defense is going to be better. But personnel wise, like just everybody's sitting here concerned about the third team defensive tackle, like it's make or break. When you're starting to more kind of worry about depth more than anything, then your standards have changed. I mean, it used to be that wait, well, who's going to start? Who do they have at the other corner? No, we don't know. Now there's a debate as to whether or not Swain or Cisse or Collier, who you're going to start there. And so that's it sets up differently, right? And so I don't, those comparisons aren't what I would call rational in one way, but in another way, we're creatures of habit, and we kind of have our sorry for those listening, my microphone cut out there. Um, we all kind of react and feel based on experience, and so everybody that experienced that, obviously, because the offseason hype is similar. There are people predicting Carolina to go to the 12-team playoff, uh, all that kind of stuff. So I want to just kind of go through some of the rankings, the way too early rankings, and kind of point this out. I've got my handy Microsoft Copilot program that looked this up for us. So ESPN has them 10th, CBS overall, that's not Josh Pate, has them 11th, 24/7 Sports has the Gamecocks, it says 11th. I thought they were lower than that. 17th, I think, in 24/7 overall. Athlon 12, USA Today 14. On 3 has them at 8th. Joel Klatt has them at 10th. I think College Football Alerts or something has them at 5th. Okay, so you know, they're kind of in that 10 to 20 range. High end would be 5th to 8th. Low end, 17 to 19. Nobody's really got them lower than 20. So they're definitely inside the top 20, usually upper second half of the top 20, right? And that's pretty solid. That's here in the SEC, I think it's hard to rank SEC teams. So they're out there. South Carolina is being discussed more on a national level than ever. And that's good and bad. And I'll tell you why, because it's hard to figure out, is all this attention a good thing or is it a bad thing? It's a good thing because ever since the SOS, the summer of Steve before the collapse in 14 or the beginning of the end in 14. And what a sad ending to a great tenure that was. It was, and I'm not saying, oh, it's just so sad. Like Spurrier used to say, this was sad. I'm not saying it like that. I'm like, it was sad that it was over when you realized, gosh, this was kind of a great time, and now it's over. But the summer of Steve, it obviously there was South Carolina football was on the map more than it had been in my lifetime. And they were just mentioned with the top teams in the country. I mean, I remember AJ McCarron, the quarterback for Alabama during that period, was like, you're doing this, and you know, next thing you know, you're playing South Carolina in the Georgia Dome for I mean, so that you had the respect to play the programs like Alabama. Like they looked at South Carolina like this was during high tide for them. Like, oh, that's a tough game. We better get up for it. And so there was never a period where South Carolina football was just that out there. Now, largely, it was because of great players like Clowney and Marcus Lattimore and Alshon Jeffrey and all that, but also because of Steve Spurrier. Steve Spurrier was a celebrity, all right? And so when he left, and Will Muschamp did the best he could and did a lot of good things as far as roster building and things like that. And then Shane Beamer gets the job, and you know, uh, there's been a relevancy issue as it relates to the publicity they once enjoyed because of a celebrity head coach and good winning seasons. And so that's hard to get in college football. It's much harder in college basketball, but it's hard to get in college football. And why does it matter? Well, who cares what they say, JC? Who cares about the hype? Well, the reason it does, normally it wouldn't. I'm not a big, publicity guy. That's a lot of hat and no cattle. I'm like about the meat and potatoes. But it's important in college football because of two things. Number one, how do you attract players? Even with money now, you have to recruit them. I mean, we found out in a couple of situations through the transfer portal and in recruiting, money's not everything. There's some guys that just want to go to Michigan or a blue blood or whatever, or you don't even get to talk to them because there's no interest because they don't know anything about you. You're not one of those big time schools that everybody mentions. So there's that. And so it's an uphill battle, Muschamp and then Shane Beamer fought. Now, Shane has a great plan for it. I've mentioned before the social media followers are up. That's how kids communicate. You still have to go recruit them, even with all the money talk. And you have to be relevant in that regard. So that's your lifeblood. It's how you get talent. The more relevant you are, the more mentioned you are, the more familiar players are, the better chance you have to get them on campus for a visit, the better chance you have to even get to the conversation about NIL or to even get to the conversation about depth chart or to even get to the point where recruiters like Mike Fury or Sterling Lucas or Lonnie Teaser or whoever can start to build the relationship. There's an opening of the door. And it's much easier. People want to know why do Blue Bloods recruit so well. Most people just think it's because they win, and that certainly is part of it. But it's also because they're well known. You're sitting at your high school, and the coach goes, "Coach from South Carolina called," and you think one thing. The coach from Alabama called, and you think another. Even though those two teams had the exact same record and identical results, and honestly, it was a 2-point game last year. There's really wasn't a lot of difference between South Carolina and Alabama last season, which is amazing when you think about the progress they made. But those two teams are similar. But no, they don't care. One's Alabama, one's South Carolina. So how do you fight that? Just you get South Carolina out there, and it doesn't really work if you don't back it up with wins and big moments. And Shane Beamer's certainly done that. I mean, when you make national news when you win a game, or when you have a prime time game like Tennessee in 2022 or Texas A&M in 2024, that's very helpful because everybody's watching, they see it, they see the stadium going berserk, all that happiness. So that's important. But Justin King and his stuff that he puts out, it's all Carolina's fault relevancy and social media videos and moments in time when you're going to win and things like that. Even like recruiting Nick Harbor on signing day. Those all send statements, but you know, uh, a whole off season worth of high expectations is also extremely valuable moving forward. I'll also say this with rankings, the committee. This is still the same. Looks like we're going to auto bids in 2026, but you know the committee's still deciding, and I am convinced. I am convinced that South Carolina. You remember last year they weren't even ranked because they had three losses because unga bunga, three loss, two loss, and that's a dumb way to do it. But it took them a while to even get ranked and even move into position. Well, I think if everybody has you ranked, the AP included, you know, the committee, as long as you're kind of holding serve and winning games, that's obviously important. But there's something subconscious about that team that's been in the top 10 to 15 all year versus the team that started off 1-3 in the conference and then gets hot. And I don't know why. I don't necessarily agree with it. I think it's dumb. But the football mindset is not like the basketball mindset. No, obviously, because basketball, they reward those teams, even though the net ranking allegedly in basketball wants to count November games just as much. But in basketball, historically, how are you playing now? There was never a discussion about that. It was all, well, you know, they lost and you know, they lost the head to head way back when, you know, all that crap. So I think that it's very positive to have these types of expectations from a ancillary point of view, a support point of view, a program progress point of view. I think that's good. That's overwhelmingly good, and it's been a while, right, since we've had this kind of off season. Gamecocks in the top 10 to 20. For a quarterback like Lenore Sellers, I don't. It's been since the Todd Ellis era since there's been every Heisman list has the South Carolina quarterback on it. And there's been some good quarterbacks. Don't get me wrong, but Sellers has enough wow in him to get that type of attention. So that's good too. You want your players to be drafted high. You want your players to win awards. Gamecocks had the Bronco Nagurski winner this past year because it's all sales. You know, go back sales, and the better you can sell, the better the chances you are that the better the chances you're going to get a benefit of the doubt from the committee or a committee, hopefully, and they're also going to be able to attract talent. It's become a fun place to play. And there's a certain amount of elite players that want that kind of environment. But you know, if in their mind, you're kind of a second tier, not a first tier, you know, that hurts. But if you're first tier and you're mentioned with everybody else, that subconscious bias goes away. And so you got a better opportunity to get better players. And so South Carolina is going to benefit from that. Now, here's the downside. Here's the downside. SEC teams that aren't blue bloods tend to fall kind of on their face at times. Now, this was more when we had divisions. It was always in the East too, because you had Georgia very dominant, and you know Florida would still pop up and win one every now and then. But since Kirby's been at Georgia, they've been the dominant team. So the question's always like, well, who has the best chance of knocking them off? So I mean, it was a Tennessee with Josh Dobbs choke. They lost to South Carolina in 2016. It cost them 17. It was the Gamecocks, 7-6. 18 was probably probably Kentucky. They faded at the end. Or no, 18 was the Gamecocks. 17 was Tennessee. 18, the off season between 16 and 17. 18 was the Gamecocks. 19 was the infamous Kelly Bryant Missouri team that people were like, they're a dark horse for the playoff. They're going to be undefeated by the time they play Georgia, blah, blah, blah. They were 6-6 and Barry Odom was fired. In 20, I don't think anybody knew what was going on. Tennessee was supposed to be good, and they went 3-7. So I'll give that one to the Vols. 2021, who was the dark horse in the East? Maybe Missouri. I don't know. 2022, it was Tennessee in the East, obviously, and they were really good until they ran into the Gamecocks. Orange Bowl team, 11-2. And 23, maybe it was South Carolina. They fell. So, this past season we didn't have divisions, um, but there were a lot of people on the Kentucky bandwagon. Ole Miss, I think Ole Miss was a really good football team. They finished 10-3, but was that really what people thought? Most people had them going to the playoff. People had Missouri going to the playoff, and so that scares you a little bit. Ole Miss and Missouri were both on a bunch of playoff lists, top 10 list, and they were both a combined 20-6. So they were good football teams. However, they didn't make the playoff. LSU was up there too. So I don't know. With the way they do it now, maybe my little theory about you don't want that you don't want that label as being the newcomer in the SEC that's going to finally challenge. Uh, Maybe with divisions that's gone away, but cautionary tale. And and that really applies to like non-blue bloods. Really applies to like your big six or whatever. Now the big seven with Texas, they're fine. They typically, if they're supposed to be good, they'll be good. So that's the downside. So I think it's very important overall, for everybody to embrace the high expectations. I know a lot of players are gone from last year's team, but I'll say this 20 more times. If you're going to be a big time football program, uh, you can't sit there and fret about who you've lost and act like you got one shot to do it. That's why you recruit. That's why recruiting is important. That's why you hire recruiters. That's why you have NIL money. Um, so we'll see sort of what happens. But that's kind of my take on the expectations slash hype. Carolina. It is the first off season, I think, since that 2013 to 14 off season, the summer of Steve, that there's been top 10 to 20 expectations. And when you have Lenore Sellers and Dylan Stewart, and you're kind of a program that's on a roll, and you got good players, hey, that's that's what you want. Outcomes, I make no promises. I look at the schedule, folks, and it's like, a lot of people are chatting up this 5-0 start. I don't know because Missouri's going to be really, really good. That's a team nobody's really talking about. Oh, they lost Brady Cook and Luther Burden. If you looked at their defense, I mean, the quarterback they got from Penn State, Bo Pribula, he's a freaking one of my favorite players. And it's out there. And it's Eli Drinkwitz. I don't know, man. That one's tough. I don't know what to think about Kentucky. They've got a lot of new players. They got a new quarterback. Mark Stoops isn't going to go quietly into that good night. Thankfully, it's at Williams-Brice. I guess, thankfully, it's at Williams-Brice. Gamecocks have won 2 in a row in Lexington now and have a winning record up there overall. And then, how I feel about Diego Pavia in the kill zone. I mean, that game, it looks, it's a trap. It's a booby trap almost, because you're like, it's the SEC opener. You got a huge opener in Atlanta. You got SC State coming in the next week, and then SEC opener against Vanderbilt. With bigger games down the road. But if you go into that one and sleepwalk, you're getting beat. Plus, you got this long streak. Vanderbilt eventually will beat Carolina again someday. And Diego Pavia is back, which is amazing. So I don't know. I don't know what to think about that 5-0 start. But if you can get there, then it gets really tough. But I was on a show the other day out of Nashville, and they were asking me about it. And with the youth and inexperience on defense and some other spots, it's going to be a younger roster this year, regardless. maybe that it's tough, but it's not, on paper right now, it's not LSU, Alabama, Oklahoma, Ole Miss. Maybe there's a growing, kind of like Sellers did this year. He was much better as the season went on. Young players can make that kind of progress, but you don't want to have a starting point on August 31st of a long way to go, like sort of did in the opener this past year, because that's going to derail things quickly, and you're going to be constantly behind the eight ball. So we'll see what happens. But in conclusion, this hype off season, I think it's probably 80% positive, and then the 20% goes, gosh, I wish they'd be under the radar. I don't get too caught up in complaining about it. I mean, I do think South Carolina's a top 25 team. I would vote them in my top 20 most likely if it were just me looking at it, just because of the great player factor and the momentum of the program. But who knows? Who knows how it really will work out? And when I see somebody not rank them high or pick them to go 7-5, that's fine with me. It's fine with me. It'll all work it out, and hopefully, Coach Beamer, and I know he does. They're going to play the disrespect card. That's a powerful card. I mean, look up the road in the upstate. They've won how many national championships and ACC titles, and they still play the disrespect card, and it works. It works. There's nothing wrong with that. I'll be back inside the Gamecocks, the show with Phil, the Mad Dog, and myself later today. Ray Tanner, not coming on to talk about the state of the current baseball program. He's coming on to talk about In Spirit, speaking of ESPN movies, the documentary from SEC Story about the, long in the rearview mirror. But seems like it was yesterday, national championship runs for South Carolina baseball. Unforgettable moments, folks, and don't worry. I think they'll get back there one day. These things happen, but I still have a lot of faith in the baseball program as long as certain things happen and you get out of the rut. I can also see, long-term struggles if bad decisions continued to be made, but that's a topic for another day. Appreciate all of you listening to Coffee. Please like, share, subscribe right here on YouTube, and we'll holla at you soon. It's JC Shurburtt. I'm out.